We have an impression of the kind of people who are going to end up responding to God. And usually the kind of people that we expect to respond to God are people who are good people, people who are righteous people, people who are already moral people, people who appear to intuitively have the Ten Commandments built into them. And usually we think, well, there's the people who are going to respond to God, and then there's the people who are outside of God's purview, outside of God's grace, outside of what God is up to. I think sometimes we make a mistake. And there's a character in the book of Acts who ends up becoming a really powerful influence through the new covenant. And his name is Shaul. And Shaul is commonly known as Paul in most biblical translations. But Shaul is how he was born. Shaul is how he grew up. Shaul is what he was called at the academy when he was studying, and he was a Pharisee of excellent standing. In fact, later on in his life, when he's explaining his life to a pagan king, he says that he did everything that was required of being a Pharisee. And with Shaul, for him to have done everything that was required to be a Pharisee, it means that in all likelihood he was a married man and he had had children, because in the Pharisaic reading of Torah, the 5 books of Moses, the first commandment that is recognized there is be fruitful and multiply at the very beginning of Genesis. So Shaul says he did everything that was necessary to be a Pharisee, and so maybe our major apostle is a guy whose wife was taken away from him after his coming to faith in Messiah, because his wife certainly would have come out of the center of Jerusalem and out of a Pharisaic family that would have been less than thrilled about his embracing Messiah Yeshua. But that is an excursus. That's on the side. When Shaul is trying to explain his faith to others, he tells the story of being on a road heading to another city. And he had determined that the proclamation of Yeshua as Messiah, Yeshua of Nazareth, Yeshua as the one that God has sent, God's chosen and anointed and appointed one, was a lie. And as a result of this, Shaul ends up looking at this and determining that because he believes this to be a lie, it is a proper and an appropriate thing for him to oppose this with the full force of judicial law. So he goes wherever he can go, he finds whoever is believing this, he pulls people out in secret, he attacks men, he attacks women, he attacks children, and he does everything that he can to genocide this nascent and new religious movement in his generation. And as he is doing all of this, he decides that it is not enough to get rid of the believers of this in Jerusalem. And indeed, in Acts, it says that as this persecution starts, what ends up happening is Jerusalem is emptied of followers of Yeshua as Messiah. But he starts going to other cities, and he's on the road to Damascus. And as he's headed to Damascus, he has a blindingly white light that encounters him. And he knows it's God. But what he says is, he says, "Who are you, Adonai?" Or "Who are you, Lord?" And as he says, "Who are you, Adonai?" the voice of the one who has encountered him, who has blinded him, says, "I am Yeshua, whom you persecute." Now, for me, this is a stunning thing, that a person who was so convinced in his heart and mind, this was not a live and let live kind of guy. This was instead a guy who had determined that he was so convinced of the wrongness of this new sect, of the wrongness of this population, of the wrongness of this proclamation, that he gets to a point where he is willing to genocide people in the name of God. And there have been many who have attempted to destroy other people, believing that God is on their side. But there's a certain amount of cynicism, and there's a certain amount of people who are observers from the outside and who come to the conclusion that many who think that they have God on their side do not necessarily have God on their side. And such was the case of Shaul of Tarshish. And so Shaul encounters God, he encounters the Lord, he encounters Adonai, and God stops him and says, I am the very one whom you are convinced that you need to destroy my testimony. Shaul ends up blind. Shaul ends up receiving the mercy of someone whom he wanted to imprison and have put to death, who prays for him and has restored sight. Shaul ends up in a position where he cannot go back to Jerusalem, back to the life that he once had, because all of a sudden he has gone from being the most favored son of the Sanhedrin to being their greatest enemy. Shaul goes out into Arabia. Some people believe he might have gone to the same place that Elijah went. He might have gone to Sinai. He might have gone to where Moses brought the children of Israel. And as he goes out there, I believe he goes there for the very same reason that Elijah went there, for this very same reason the children of Israel were brought there. He wanted to go to the holiest place that he could go to so that he could understand God and understand this extraordinary thing that had just happened to him. I gotta say, this is not a person that I would have expected to encounter the mercy and the grace of God. This is not a person I would have expected to change his mind. This is not a person who I would have expected to turn around and to be a fearless proclaimer of the very message that he put people in jail for having believed in. But we have the historic account of this happening. Now, hopefully, you're not going to run into people who are going to want to destroy your life, take your wealth, put you in jail, and otherwise destroy you for the sake of your religious conviction. But at the same time, you are living in the midst of a world of billions of people at this point in time. And the billions of people who are living in this point in time, there are some whom you think, oh, I could really see them belonging to God and responding to this message. But there are others that you look at and you go, there's no way, no how this person is going to receive, because they have been stubborn, they have been mocking, they have made people's lives miserable, they have been horrific human beings, and they have tormented people for the very same belief that I could proclaim to them. I guess the point of this time that we're spending together today is, don't be so sure. Shalom.